change and continuity in India's Palestine policy. So this particular article talks about India's evolving stance in the current crisis or the Israel-Palestine conflict, and also a nuanced approach in India's foreign policy as well as its engagement on the global stage. Okay, so in this article we'll be discussing about Israel-Palestine conflict and what is India's foreign policy, that is the non-alignment movement, as well as its policy of de-hyphenation and realpolitik will be discussed here. And this can be mapped to GS Paper 2 Mains under effect of policies and politics of developed and developing countries on India's interests. So moving on, if we see previous year questions, there have been questions with respect to India's relations with that of Israel in the year 2018. We have a question, and in 2022 they had asked about I to U2 initiative between India, Israel, UAE as well as US grouping. So moving forward, let us actually understand what this particular news is about, and after which we'll understand a basic overview of the evolution of conflict between Israel and Palestine. Okay, so India's evolving stance on the Israel-Palestine conflict underscores a strategic balance, reflecting a nuanced approach in its foreign policy and engagement on the global stage. Now let us understand a brief overview on Israel-Palestine conflict, which we can actually understand through this particular infographic. Okay, so it is important to understand, prior to the World War I, actually the Jews did not have a dedicated homeland or established by them. Okay, so they were spread across regions of Europe. So this eventually actually led to a national movement by the Jewish people in order to establish a homeland in Palestine, and that time Palestine was under the rule of the Ottoman Empire. Okay, so what happened? There was a national movement, and that was Zionism, which was among the Jews in order to establish a homeland in Palestine, which was then a part of the Ottoman Empire. And this Zionism actually was triggered, or it was under the leadership or gained momentum under the leadership of Theodor Herzl. And towards the end of the World War I, what happened was that the British actually emerged successful and there was a fall of the Ottoman Empire. So the British actually issued the Balfour Declaration of 1917. And this actually supported the establishment of a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine, which will not disturb the civil and the religious rights of the non-existing Jews in that particular region. And eventually what happened, the period leading up to 1947, it actually saw an increased immigration of the Jewish people into the Palestinian territory because they were facing, that is Jews were facing, an increased religious persecution in Europe. That is what you are aware of, the Holocaust and all those things. So the immigration and the subsequent growth of this Jewish population inside the territory of Palestine actually, led to a lot of conflicts, and this led to the conflict between the Jewish and the Arab communities. So this is what we actually see here. That is the period of 1897 to 1947. The Zionist movement was there and the Balfour Declaration was there. And that actually led to a conflict between the Jewish as well as the Arab communities. Next, moving on, the period of 1947 and 1948, UN partition and the Arab-Israeli war. So here let us understand, in 1947, the United Nations proposed a plan to partition Palestine into, there was a plan to partition Palestine into two. That is, one was a Jewish state and next was an Arab state. And here Jerusalem will be under international control. So the United Nations in 1947 actually proposed a two-state plan where they actually said there will be an establishment of Jewish state for the Jewish people and there will be an Arab state, whereas Jerusalem will be under the international control. That was called as the corpus separatum. That is Jerusalem being under the control of the international, that is the United Nations control. So this plan was actually accepted by the Jewish state, but it was not accepted by the Arab leaders. Okay, so this led to the outbreak of a civil war. And following this, what happened? Israel with Jewish people declared independence on May 15, 1948, and this actually led to the invasion of the Palestinians into the Israel territory, but ultimately what happened was Israel won. So thereby thousands of Palestinians actually out-migrated, and this caused a lot of refugee crisis. So now we are actually clear with what happened in the Zionist movement, where they actually wanted to establish a territory in Palestine, and followed by that there was a Balfour Declaration. Then there was a UN partition and the Arab-Israeli war, where there was a corpus separatum, where the UN will be controlling the Jerusalem, and there will be establishment of two states, one for the Jewish as well as the Arab. But towards the end of the civil war, Israeli people or the Israel Jewish people, they actually emerged successful. Moving on, the next one, the period of 1948 to 1979, wars and peace attempts, okay. So, the decades actually following this Israel establishment, that actually marked, or it was characterized by a lot of conflicts, okay. So, that included a lot of conflicts like the Suez Crisis of 1956, the Six-Day War of 1967, this is very, very important, and the Yom Kippur War of 1973, etc. Okay, so if you take the Six-Day War, it was very, very, transformative, because Israel actually captured the regions of West Bank, East Jerusalem, Gaza Strip, as well as the Sinai Peninsula. It also included Golan Heights. So, these particular areas of West Bank, East Jerusalem, Golan Heights, Sinai Peninsula, Gaza, etc., they became center to the conflict between the Israeli Jewish people as well as the Arab Palestinians, okay. So, the efforts to actually negotiate and come to peace and all those things were actually spoken about in this particular period, but it was very, very naive and it wasn't very successful. Now, moving on to the period of 1987 to 1993, there was the first Intifada. Intifada is nothing but it was an uprising against the Israeli occupation in the West Bank as well as the Gaza Strip. Okay, so this again led to a number of protests as well as violation, and this actually led to the signing of the Oslo Accords in the year 1993. So, this actually led to the recognition between the PLO and Israel as well as the establishment of the Palestinian Authority to govern the parts of West Bank and Gaza. So, this was the Oslo Accord was actually seen as a step towards establishing a two-state solution, okay. But then again, many issues actually stayed unresolved. So, here we have understood what is this period, that is from where the conflict had actually started from 1897 till 1993. Now, let us move to the period of 2000 to 2005. Here, the second round of uprisings had actually taken place, and this triggered a lot of tension as well as violence in this Gaza region, in the West Bank region, Sinai Peninsula, etc. Okay, so it actually saw a significant loss of people, a lot of humanitarian crises were there, a lot of militarization of the conflict was actually there. So now what happened? As a result of this, Israel reoccupied the territories of Palestine, and it actually started constructing a separation barrier. However, if you see in 2005, Israel actually withdrew from this Gaza Strip, okay, and so they actually withdrew with the Israeli settlers there, but however the tensions again continued, okay. So, this was the first Intifada, that was the uprising, that is the Palestinian actually demanded the Gaza Strip, they actually demanded these areas to be their occupation, followed by that 2000 and 2005 there was second Intifada. Then moving ahead, from 2006 to 2009, what happened? Hamas had actually won. Hamas are a Palestinian group, okay. So, they actually won the Palestinian legislative elections, and there was again a huge fight between the Hamas and also the Fatah-led Palestinian Authority. So, Fatah is also a political group, okay. So, Fatah was actually governing the West Bank region, and Gaza was actually ruled by the Hamas region, and again there were concerns in this. So, here there was a violent outbreak of conflict between these two factions. From 2012 to 2014, we have Israel, which had actually launched the Operation Pillar of Defense as well as Protective Edge in 2014, and this was actually targeting the Hamas military infrastructure at Gaza. Okay, and this actually caused a lot of humanitarian destruction as well as loss of livelihoods, etc. And now if you see, the escalation in conflict still continues in 2023, whereas if you see in October 2023, there was a significant attack by the Hamas on Israel. Okay, so this actually led to the retaliation by Israel to the Hamas attack. Okay, so now let us actually move forward. So here if you see the map, here you can actually see the Sinai Peninsula, and this was the Israel territory that they had established in the Palestinian region that was occupied by the Ottoman or ruled by the Ottoman Empire. Here is actually Syria, Jordan. This is the Golan Heights, Gaza. This was the areas of conflict. This is West Bank and Jerusalem. Okay. So moving forward, this was actually the map. That is, if you see the conflict, how it has arose. So here in 1888, you can actually see this entire region was ruled by the Ottoman Empire, and here you can see this blue region was by the British Empire. And after World War I, we can see the entire region taken up by the British, and that is when we had the Balfour Declaration. Then moving on, there was a UN resolution that was actually passed for a two-state solution. Here you have the Jewish Palestine, and then you have here the Arab Palestine was there, and Jerusalem will be under the international control. Okay. So then what happened? There was an Arab-Israeli war, and then it actually transcended to the Six-Day War, and then we have the Yom Kippur Camp David Accords, and finally we had the Oslo Accords. And this is actually the situation which is actually prevalent there, where this is Israel and this portion is actually the Palestine along Gaza, etc. Now moving forward, let us see the evolution of India's approach towards Palestine, how it has been over the years. So pre-independence support and solidarity. So pre-independence itself, there was an early support by India. It was rooted in anti-colonial solidarity because Palestine was also colonized and then India was also colonized. So it was rooted in anti-colonial solidarity. There was sympathy towards the Arabs in Palestine facing the Zionist immigration and land acquisition. Followed by that, we had many of the leaders like Mahatma Gandhi. They supported the Palestinian cause. Okay. The next one, post-independence, what happened? Since 1947 till 1990s, India advocated for Palestinian rights. It in fact voted for Palestinians' partition. It in fact voted against the Palestinians' partition at the UN in 1947 and recognized the PLO for the first time in 1974. And also influenced by India's role in non-alignment movement, and India has always been balancing its relations with the Arab countries and post-Cold War dynamics. Moving forward, there were establishment of diplomatic ties with the Israel. That is, there was a slow shift in the engagement that India had with that of the Palestine towards 1992 and the period thereof. There was a formal diplomatic relation with Israel which began in 1992. And it was influenced by the end of Cold War as well as the economic liberalization that took place in our economy around 1991 period. And despite the closer ties with Israel, India continued its support for Palestinian cause as well as a two-state solution. Then the recent developments, if you see, and the balancing act in India's foreign policy, there is a balanced diplomacy that India actually has been following post 2000 till the current one. It balances growing ties with Israel with the traditional support for the Palestine. Also, it supports the two-state solution, sovereignty and independence of Palestine, reflecting support in the UN votes and criticism of any kind of unilateral actions which affect peace. So now let us understand what are certain geopolitical principles behind India's approach towards Palestine. Okay, so the first one is realpolitik and strategic autonomy. So here, this is nothing but it is a pragmatic approach that prioritizes national interest and strategic benefits. So this no more depends on any kind of the ideology that the country follows, but India actually follows this realpolitik, and this was brought about by a person named Bismarck during the unification of Germany. He was the first chancellor of Germany. Okay, India follows the policy or the principle of realpolitik, which prioritizes its national interest as well as strategical interest above the ideology that it actually has. The next one is policy of de-hyphenation. De-hyphenation is nothing but it is to deepen its strategic interest with Israel. At the same time, it actually focuses on the relation that it shares with Palestine also, because Israel is strategically important in many other aspects like defense, agriculture, technology, etc. However, on the other side, it continues to actually support Palestine on the international fora. Thereby, it actually maintains a balance between, however, it has been, following in the historical past also. Next one is legacy of non-aligned movement, where India's support for, Palestine, it actually focuses on the sovereignty of the region, the territorial integrity on the region, as well as the principle of self-determination. And it also backs the two-state solution. The next one is geopolitical stability and security. It actually fosters global peace, energy security, counter-terrorism, etc. Understanding the kind of conflict that the Middle East region is actually going through and how Middle East is going to be an important strategic region. Okay. The next one, India actually maintains a South-South cooperation in its international relations. That is, it maintains a good support that is developed in terms of development as well as humanitarian support to Palestine, and also shares its experiences with the developing countries. So this is the end of the discussion about the Israel-Palestine conflict, how it emerged, and what are the principles behind India's approach towards the Israel-Palestine conflict.